Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining this webinar. My name is Sihle. I'm the founder and the trustee of Progressive Socio-Economic Investment Institute. It is the public benefit trust established to do public benefits activities. One of those activities is education. Within education, we organize webinars focusing on various topics. I'm here as the trustee and the founder of the trust and not representing any institution or organization, but only this trust. Ladies and gentlemen, to deal with the legacy of apartheid and colonialism in South Africa, there is a dire need for massive infrastructure development. Notwithstanding the achievements of the post-1994 government, more still needs to be done in infrastructure development. Infrastructure development is critical to attaining South Africa's long-term economic and social goals and redressing the imbalances of the past created by apartheid. For South Africa, infrastructure development priorities are aligned with the continental and global development imperatives, particularly through the National Development Plan, which is called the NDP, which is the country's developmental blueprint. Colleagues, you'll agree with me when I say the construction industry is critical in creating an enabling environment, and it is also vital for the country's economy, responsible for creating jobs, stimulating investment, and improving infrastructure. However, colleagues, in some parts of the country, legitimate community forums or business forums or concerned groups established to advance the interests of communities are infiltrated and hijacked by criminals demanding money and terrorizing construction sites. Let me repeat this, colleagues. I'm saying in some parts of the country, legitimate community forums or business forums or concerned groups which were established to advance the interests of the communities are now infiltrated and hijacked by criminals demanding money and terrorizing construction sites. This is really collapsing the infrastructure development in the country. This phenomenon, colleagues, is commonly labeled as construction mafia. It has brought many companies to their knees, and it's reported that in some instances, people have lost their lives. This phenomenon cost the South African economy over 68 billion rand. But not only that, it has negatively impacted investor confidence in South Africa. There are also talks in corridors that these mafias finance the lives of some of the politicians and even people within the justice cluster. These are just talks yet to be confirmed through the facts. They are just talks within the corridors that these mafias finances the lives of some of the politicians and even people within the justice cluster. Like I said, these are just talks yet to be confirmed through the facts. It is reported that in 2019 alone, at least 183 infrastructure and construction projects worth more than 63 billion were affected by these disruptions of the construction mafia. As I said, colleagues, my name is Sihle, the founder and the trustee of Progressive Socio-Economic Investment Institute, a trust established for public benefit activities. I'm here as a trustee and the founder of the trust and not representing the views of any other institution except the trust. Today's topic is the role of government in protecting the construction sector from construction mafias. We are so humbled that we've got speakers who will represent perspectives, various perspectives on this topic. The first speaker will be the president of the Association of Construction Project Managers, Anthony Afordofe, who will talk about the lived experiences of construction project managers. He is the president of Association of Construction Project Managers. He'll be followed by Dr. Ongama Mtika, who is a lecturer in the Department of History and Political Studies at Nelson Mandela University. I'm also proud to say I'm also doing my studies in PhD in the Nelson Mandela University. I'm a student there. He'll present to us the political economy of construction. The last speaker will be the Honorable Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, Honorable Mr. Sihle Zikalala, who will give a government perspective and interventions in dealing with construction mafias. Once more, welcome to the webinar, and thanks to all panel members who volunteered their time to come and share their views with us. We are grateful to have you as panel members, and we are humbled by your gesture. The ground rules is that we will allow the speakers to present, and after the speakers have presented, we will then take questions, necessary questions that will be coming from all of you as members of this webinar. We will first take 3 questions, allow panel members to respond, and followed up by 3 questions, allow panel members to respond, and take the last 3 questions and allow the panel members to respond. We encourage you, colleagues, also to write your questions in the chat boxes. If you've got any question related to this topic, write it in the chat box so that the panel members will be able to respond to your question. Without a waste of time, I'll hand over to our first speaker, the President of the Association of Construction Project Manager, President Afordofe. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rakolote. It's a pleasure to be part of this webinar. I would like to take the opportunity to greet the Honorable Minister, the Honorable Mr. Ongama Mtika, and yourselves as a host. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I think mine is simple. Ours is to set the tone to talk about the lived experiences of construction project managers. So I'm going to take it very light before we get into the thick of things. I'm going to start by painting a picture in terms of why we actually arrive at the issue of construction mafia. So let's take a few steps back, and then we will come and meet the issue of the day. Thank you so much. So let me get right into it. Construction project management is really the management of time, cost, and quality, as we all know it. Those are the 3 key words that we normally use, but it's quite deeper than that once we start to unpack and unfold those 3 words. So time, cost, and quality of any type of construction project. In an ideal world, we would finish the projects within the set time frames, the cost parameters, and according to the specifications and qualities that we agreed from the onset. But we are not living in an ideal world, so things do happen. And those are the pictures that I want to paint for you. Well, where do projects come from? Projects are generally sponsored by the public and private sectors, investor groupings, public and private partnerships, etc., etc. So somebody has to find a need for a project to be implemented, and the need is usually related to the beneficiation of people, of the citizens of the country. So some projects are implemented by government, some projects are implemented by private sector. Projects usually arise from public needs, from a public-private sector point of view. By government on its own, government has a national development plan that they have embarked on several years ago to implement projects that cater for the nation's security, for housing, be it social housing, RDP housing, health infrastructure in the name of clinics and hospitals, services infrastructure, which is bulk services in the name of water, sewer, stormwater, electricity, and now we're talking solar, wind farms, and alternative energy. The implementations of road projects, rail, aeronautic, which is airport infrastructure, and then we talk about the harbor infrastructure, which are all part and parcel of what government needs to implement for the economy to flourish. There is the part of educational facilities, which is schools and universities. So how does government and private sector go about doing this or implementing this type of project? Definitely there needs to be a project team that needs to be assembled to be able to carry out the planning, design, construction, and handover of such projects back to the client. In the process of implementing the above projects by various project teams, which we call professional teams and contractors, we have stakeholders who are part and parcel of projects. We've got people we call interested and affected parties within the municipality area where the project is located, the communities where the projects are located, the wards where the projects are located. There are groupings called project steering committees that are formed in the community to assist with the management of such projects, and also roles we call community liaison officers who form part of projects that government is running. The interface between the project and the public becomes really localized in certain areas where the construction site is located. So this is usually demarcated in what we call a zone ward, especially if the project is sitting on the outlying areas of the built-up metropolitan areas. Government has introduced legislation some time ago that now allows the participation of small, medium, micro enterprises, which we call SMMEs, with the inclusion of a 30% of construction budget spent in further equipping local skilled and unskilled labor to participate on construction sites. We thought this was a very good idea in terms of creating value within the community, uplifting communities, educating communities, creating jobs within communities, whilst implementing projects for the same community to consume. These projects are then implemented through what we call a main contractor who has subcontractors who work under him during the implementation of any new project. But there is something we call public participation. There's a public participation process whereby the projects are introduced to the community structures regarding the scope, what the project is about, the size of the project, and the implementation plan and how long the project will take to allow for inclusion based on the previous points highlighted above. Therefore, allowing the creation of what we call local databases for SMMEs and also for local general labor within the communities where the projects are being implemented. There is a qualification process, though, to participate in the projects through the vetting from the main contractors that are appointed, usually with consultants called community participation consultants, and the local political structures that exist, which is the ward councillors and the community liaison officers. So these groupings will assist the main contractor to sift the skills within the area who can qualify to participate and benefit in the project at large. During the construction phase, we usually find groupings who label themselves as what we are calling now construction mafias. So we've gone into the communities, we've introduced the project, we understand what needs to be done, databases are created, we get onto site, project commences, all of a sudden there's groups that come to the construction site to demand certain issues. I'll get into that just now. They use what we call alternative methods to impress on the main contractor their needs and wishes out of the project, which are never usually documented, agreed from the initiation process of the project, because there's a specific strategic way in which the public participation process takes place. Right. So these are some of the alternative methods usually used to impose on the main contractors on site. The new SMMEs on the contractor, and the contractor has already appointed SMMEs through a database system. They demand financial compensation if the above cannot be met. They demand that their suppliers with whom they have relationships with to be used by the main contractor for procurement of materials. They can influence the existing appointed SMMEs to down tools and disrupt the site with the promise that they can demand higher rates from the contractor, which is usually unrealistic to the project budget. If there is a planned cohesion between the business forums, I'm sorry to say, but also ward councillors and CLOs, the contractor and the construction project management team and the client will have no choice or no chance of completing and successfully completing the project, because you continuously have site stoppages and disruptions. Strategies normally used by the business forums and or construction mafias would be in the form of hijacking of sites. So they hijack site meetings, what we call site meetings. So periodically, every 2 weeks, we have site meetings on site for technical or progress meetings. They come in armed, demanding financial compensation on the spot, or else their demands are to be met. Holding people hostage on site, in site camps, until financial demands are met. They vandalize the equipment and property that is on site to construct the banning of equipment and property on site, and to the latest, the shooting and killing of people on site who have woken up to go and do a hard day's job to provide food and sustenance for their families. Now, the above issues then cause a lot of delays, over expenditure on projects, and wastage of taxpayers' hard-earned money exponentially on many, many, many sites. I personally have gone through such occurrences on site, where we were having a site meeting and gunmen came on site to block the site gate, blocked us into the site, came onto site and demanded that they see the contractor and the project managers on site, demanding that there needs to be budget allocated for them during the course of the project before they can allow us to construct on site, or else our lives will be in danger. So these are some of the issues that are real on the ground. I think our facilitator mentioned earlier on that according to the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project source, since 2019, several groups across the country have extorted no less than 183 infrastructure and construction projects worth over 63 billion rands via protection rackets. So it is really not a joke. I think my part was to lay the foundation in terms of what the situations are on site. I believe Dr. Ongama Mtika will elaborate on some of the statistics of the political economy of construction. So I'll leave that stats there for now. But in closing, I would like to make a few remarks as follows towards finding long-lasting solutions to the problem of construction mafias on project sites. I began earlier by saying we involve ward councillors, we involve community liaison officers, we involve community participation consultants. These are new roles being played within the built environment sector just because of the issue of construction mafias and community issues to resolve matters, but in most cases have proven unsuccessful because force is the medium the construction mafia uses. As professional teams and contractor, our site securities are usually unarmed because there has never been a need to provide armed securities where we believe the projects are being implemented for the benefit of the communities. But we need to look into the budgeting and providing for budgets for armed security from inception to completion of projects because lives are now being endangered on project sites. So it's something we are taking up with clients very strongly. It might increase budgets upfront, but I think it's a necessity that we need to look at because at the end of the day, construction mafias are causing extension to project costs in any event. As professional teams, we also normally involve SAPs
outside right,
to assist in resolving such issues and the disruptions on site, but they normally confirm that this is beyond their duties and jurisdictions. So we had another suggestion to say, what about the deployment of military forces by government to project sites to guard both human resources, financial resources, and property being built? Just as they do in peacekeeping, I think there is an angle there that we can look at in providing additional manpower and armed forces on site. The same legislature that introduced the 30% spend for SMMEs and local labor must also introduce a new piece of legislation that protects its financial implementation and beneficiation to communities, to SMMEs, to the success of project sites, project teams, and all affected parties during the implementations of projects. I have been given a very short time. I think I'll pause there, and I hope our Honorable Minister will elaborate on government's perspectives and interventions to eradicate the issues of construction mafias. I think the industry is ready to have structured conversations around the table where we can find meaningful solutions to preserve and safeguard the people of South Africa. I thank you.
Thank you so much, the President of the Association of Construction Project Managers, Mr. Anthony. We really appreciate your input. The key thing that you have submitted here is that when you arrive in an area, you establish what is called the project steering committees, which involves the community liaison officer and the ward councillors. And these people are responsible to source out the local database that will deal with local labor and also local subcontracting. We really appreciate your input on this matter. Without a waste of time, we'll hand over to Dr. Ongama to give us a perspective on the political economy on construction. Over to you, Dr. Ongama.
Good evening to the Honorable Minister, our host, as well as everybody on call, all protocol observed. Thank you for inviting me to speak tonight. Please allow me to share my screen, host, if you may. I'd like to talk, to show my slides while I speak so that if I'm speaking too fast, people may follow the main points on the slides. I'll get started so long. My focus, the focus of my research on this phenomenon was when it started manifesting in Nelson Mandela Bay. It was around 2000. I have a personal journey on this. I graduated with majors in politics and journalism at Rhodes, and then went to work in an activist organization, the Guga Development Corporation. I think there what excited me the most was the alignment of my politics, the sense that there has got to be more done to change the political economic reality in South Africa, and the fact that people needed to run businesses or development organizations that achieve results. So Guga for me was an awakening of sort, but also showing how is it that executives acting within state-owned companies and special economic zones could be able to, drive both the imperatives of delivering on infrastructure projects, but at the same time achieving broader political economic objectives in the country. I'm still trying to see whether I can share my screen. So I mentioned that because okay, sure, no, I see now I can, okay. I mentioned this, exposure that I had to an organization very early in my life that could do both the delivery of infrastructure projects while at the same time vehemently pursuing other developmental outcomes, such as distribution, fairness, and equity, was quite interesting because I saw how is it that organizations can achieve the broader political objectives of the country while also helping to achieve or to deliver services to people. So the two are not antithetical, as we have been led to believe by many, that if you are compelling organizations to achieve the imperatives of creating a more inclusive country, that by virtue of doing that, you are actually, sabotaging effective delivery of services. So I'll come back to that. My focus mainly in the research is on, in fact, in this particular presentation tonight, is the political economy of making and remaking institutions. And I'm reflecting from a process of the rise and fall of business forums in Nelson Mandela Bay with a view to contribute to this ongoing discussion in the country about the role of business forums, or in fact, the construction mafia. I'm not going to repeat what my colleague has said, but indeed in the post-94 period, because of what economists would call economies of backwardness, there was a huge growth in infrastructure spending by both government and private sector. In Nelson Mandela Bay, that took the form of addressing the housing backlog. Initially, the housing backlog, it took the form of the spatial development initiatives in '96, when the projects of Guga and East London were born at the Deepwater Port and Industrial Development Zone, and much later the Dube Trade Port, the other SEZs that were born out of that initial strategy to drive export-oriented industrialization in South Africa. So as a result of that, there was growth in investment. In Gqeberha, or Nelson Mandela Bay at large, which includes Kariega and Dispatch, what happened was that Motherwell was chosen as one of the targeted townships for urban renewal under the 2001 urban renewal program by former President Thabo Mbeki, which made Motherwell and Mdantsane in the Eastern Cape as the designated townships to participate. Now, forums arose in Nelson Mandela Bay as far back as 2007 out of the concentrated investment in Motherwell. Motherwell had seen the building of a police station, it saw the building of a shopping center, it saw the building of new courts, the multi-purpose sports centers, the Tusong service centers. And I want to explain one concept as I continue. There's agreement in among people who study the role of development projects in conflict in the continent particularly, that it is in the nature of development projects themselves to actually generate conflict sometimes. Because as new development projects happen, they change how structures of representation in a society were organized. New people arise to challenge structures of representation. So I'm not surprised, sir, the chair of the forum, sorry, I just want to get my notes quickly. I'm not surprised when you say these forums arise notwithstanding your, I think it was Mr. Anthony Afordofe, I hope I'm not butchering your name and surname there. It's not surprising that these forums come at the end of the processes of consultation. The reason is that they undermine the pre-existing structures, and that is in the nature of development that takes place. That when development projects take place, one of the things that happen is that the defined roles of who represents who in a community get to be a lot more fluid because new representatives crowd in the space and therefore become an emergent power structure that challenges the existing structure. So that's one of the things that happened in Motherwell. For a long time, there was a tension between a councillors' development forum and an emerging forum of groups. And then what the ANC did in 2010, 2011, in Nelson Mandela Bay, it approved a budget of spending 80% of the capital budget in previously disadvantaged wards. And what that did was to trigger a critical mass of projects beyond Motherwell, where there was tarring of gravel roads, there was upgrading of informal settlements, there was a lot of work happening in many wards. And the implications of that were further changes in terms of definitions of things, and I'll explain that shortly. So anyway, growth in the sector triggered by government investment in previously unaccessed areas or areas where there was poor services. And then the point I'm making for us to think about is that development triggers conflict. Development gives rise to new power or power seekers that want to challenge those that have already got defined roles to represent the community, and therefore conflict breaks out. And then, as I was explaining my personal interest in this, at Guga, Guga in fact won awards as far back as 2007. And I think it was your very own Dr. Bridget Gasa went on to chair the Dube Trade Port and the executives at Guga, Mr. Pepe Silinga and them, who started and championed under EPWP a very effective contractor development program, where contractors came in from grades 1 and exited at grade 4. And this is long before, like 2006, before there was, organized, more transaction-based forms of organization. This is when you still had a NAFCOC that was a lot more organized. There's bad feedback from someone. So anyway, the Guga had started prescribing back in the mid-2030, in the mid-2000s, 30% compliance, and they were doing verification of BEE points and were catching out companies that were fronting. So I was introduced this corporate activism by a state-owned company that was developing infrastructure for itself and also assisting government elsewhere with infrastructure development. So my personal interest arose in this. And then in 2012, when I heard stories being reported of people that were stopping projects and demanding work, I thought, wow, this is quite interesting. Sorry to speak about it in endearing terms, but as a political scientist who's got interest in political economy, I was asking myself, how do we grapple with this as a field? Remember, we've been studying political economy in South Africa, and there's been focus on history of inequality in general. There's been focus on pathways to industrialization. There's been focus on the mining energy complex. And I think my study is one of the few that are focusing on microeconomic or industry-specific issues with a view to theorize about what's happening that can have implications on policy. So my interest was, how do we, as the political science or political economy discipline, capture what is happening, you know? So first of all, my interest was to capture it for the discipline and theorize about it and write about it. And then the secondary aspect was whether or not one could have a contribution to ongoing policy discussions, and I'm going to try and run a lot faster. So, and then lastly, yeah, I think I've just dealt with these two, the policy impact as well as the, now here's the politically, the broad, and I think my colleague Anthony, I think, has already addressed some of these. I had to look at who are the actors, who are those who influence allocated work in the infrastructure space. And indeed, it's supply chain officers of either private sector or public sector institutions. It's established contractors. It's emerging contractors, and then chambers and forums. Chambers generally tend to be a lot more policy focused in their lobbying, while forums tend to be a lot more transaction focused. So they tend to attract a huge following in a very short period of time and undermine chambers precisely because they are more transactional. And if you are part of the group, then you are promised allocation of work, among other things. So this is these are the people or the institutions that play a role. We know that there are no holy cows in this group. We may be talking about the business forums or the construction mafia in not so endearing terms, but our own competition commission has shown that emerging established contractors are in fact a mafiosi in this country, or in fact have behaved in ways that show mafia-type tendencies. The collusion in the 2010 stadia. And then also, South Africa's industry tends to be concentrated and untransformed. And what happens is that there's a lot of, that vertical integration of South African companies, where there's been attempts to try and unbundle companies, but the bottom line is that there remains industry practices that are very corrupt. And this is very evident when I analyze the data from my participants, where supply chain officers with established contractors or emerging contractors and politicians collude to make the sector not to be free market. So while we may acknowledge the processes of open tendering, the fact of the matter is that very often the outcomes from tender processes end up being outcomes of power networks that have captured the system. And so the outcomes, even though in many instances they appear to be, fair and square, very often they are geared to benefit particular big contractors and big suppliers, where, for example, they would even go to the extent of, in a construction of a hospital, the particular tiles and particular materials that are used are prescribed. And you find that there's only one or two suppliers nationally that supply those materials that are that are regulated. So I'm exploring further this work in a book that I'm writing, Pathways to Inclusion, a Political Economy of South Africa in the 21st Century. This phenomenon that I've just explained now talks about power constellations and power networks that hold countries at ransom. And the view, among some of them that share this view, is the late great mind in this country in political economy, Saint-Peter Blanche. And the point here is that particular power constellations can help explain what kind of institutions are made in a particular political environment. The point here is that what kind of a bidding system, what kind of a construction sector we have, who is dominant, who is not, is a function of who sits around the table in the making of policies. The entire CIDP grading system, for example, the prescription of work as to what quantities of work should be, packaged for which grades of companies. All of those serve to favor particular powerful networks and disadvantage others. What I found from my data is that, and I want to show how, and the big finding here was that the groups that make rules, they make rules mindful of how they stand to benefit or lose. So in order for us to create a fair system that is inclusive, we need to be aware of all the power holders that are there and design rules and systems that are truly inclusive and not be swayed by powerful interests in society, whether those powerful interests have been established over millennia or decades, or it's groups that are coming up now. About this point, before maybe I get to this data, I was explaining this thing of how captured our systems are, and the power constellations. It's in the nature of capitalism to be violent, especially at the early stages of a system that's or a system that's undergoing transformation. Ben Mezrich writes a book, Once Upon a Time in Russia, and he talks about the period in which Boris Yeltsin came into power and then handed over to Vladimir Putin. And please pardon my politics here and drawing a lot from politics. We want to drive a point about how power influences what happens in society. Ben Mezrich chronicles the story of how the scramble for former state-owned enterprises in Russia happened, where the oligarchs, every one of them had to be driven with huge security detail because there were violent fights among them, vying for the control of particular state-owned enterprises, and not just oligarchs. For example, it tells the story of how I think it was Boris Berezovsky wanted to structure the aluminium sector in Russia and found that it was heavily violent, and people were eliminating one another in the aluminium business. You go to, maybe someone is going to say, that's Russia. Go to New York and how particular economic sectors were formed in New York. At the base of it was mafia-type organizations, which grew from the mafia to becoming mainstream. And in the funny furniture sector, for example, they would block other competitors, other players from entering into furniture sectors, into the tobacco sector, among others. In fact, I think it's Johan van Lochenberg's book as well on tobacco wars, which shows elements of what we are seeing among mainstream manufacturers. So the point I'm making is that the violence tends to be right at the center sometimes of how nations that are undergoing transitions remake their modes of production, would be the more capitalism or some hybrid system. Also, I think what's worth noting here is that Phakamisa Nzamela, in his book Native Merchants, shows how, for example, in the mining of diamonds in Kimberley in the 1800s, there was this lobby group of white-only, organized white-only group of diamond miners that were attempting to put pressure on a governor who was very liberal in Kimberley to try and preclude black merchants from owning diamond mining companies. And this governor was actually refusing. For many years, refused to do their bidding, and they formed a protectorate, an armed group of sorts that was terrorizing other people that were operating, particularly black people that were operating in Kimberley. And I thought, wow, this is an interesting story of earlier, manifestations of these forums. And lastly, I want to talk about how in what we are seeing then, the rise of the British Empire. I tweeted this earlier, and I want to read quickly what Neil Ferguson in his book Empire says when he talks about.
Let's round up, Dr. Mtika. Let's round
sure.
up. Yeah.
Sure. So when he talks about the rise of the British Empire, okay, I'm not going to read it, but I'll summarize. He makes the point that it took pirates in the form of Henry Morgan to go in December 1623 to go and invade a Spanish-controlled Caribbean island and plunder that island and steal a lot of things, destroy a lot of ships, and then became Britain's pathway to becoming an imperial superpower, catching up with the Spaniards and the Portuguese. Anyway, in wrapping up, maybe let me just skip this and come to this slide. The groups wanted to push for there to be transformation in Nelson Mandela Bay. I understand what Mr. Anthony was saying, that in KZN, if he was talking about KZN, it appears that the process of procurement is already inclusive, and by the time the construction mafia arrives, there are already SMMEs that are appointed. This was not necessarily the case in Nelson Mandela Bay. The forums came to an environment in which there wasn't, a critical mass of local suppliers. So their activities resulted in local suppliers being included. The preferential procurement framework does have, some broad imperatives in terms of how transformation should be undertaken. Obviously, that's undergoing some significant changes, but the 30% rule didn't come with the forums themselves. This had been a commitment in terms of what government had been wanting to achieve. The problem with the forums is the transaction level activism that they did. But what the result was in Nelson Mandela Bay is that it ensured that there was transformation in procurement practices in the construction sector, and I will show that just now. One of the problems with them is that they wanted work to be allocated rather than tendering and competing for the work. And I raise an issue in terms of policy discussions about that. Also, the imperatives of the construction guys were not always noble. Some of them were, people who were seeking to not build businesses at all. It was people who wanted a quick buck, so they go and put pressure, get the work, and then don't deliver on the contract. They sell the contract either back to the main supplier, undermining the very transformation imperatives, main contractor, or sometimes sell it to others for just a quick buck. So these are the problems that were there. Also, there were positives, though, that came as a result of their activities in Nelson Mandela Bay. Some big private developers here, ensured that 325 million is set aside for SMMEs. There were workshops that were held. There were SED programs that were run. There were, BE score improvement initiatives that were made. This was before the automatic qualification as level 1 of SMEs. And then also, there were enterprise development programs launched by various. So there's been a number of responses from the sector that are needed. I'm going to skip this one that talks about the definition of local and other things. This is my recommendation among others. I mean, the thesis itself is very comprehensive. My view is contrary to this view that these groups must be dismissed. I think there should be a three-pronged approach. One is engage, affirm, and develop. South Africa's transformation in the past 300 years was to take people that lived on an economy that was devoid of what's happening in the colonial capitalism and destroy that economy so that everybody depended on the mainstream economy. Now, 300 years later, the mainstream economy is proving incapable of including everybody. But you cannot blame the so-called excess numbers of people that are gathered around cities and have become part of the so-called lumpen proletariat and are causing these problems, increases in organized crime, among other things. There's a need to engage, affirm, and develop them, as I've shown in terms of what the responses were from the industry earlier. Also become inclusive innovatively and early. The problem here is that big companies also play a role in the collusion with, there were instances, for example, in Nelson Mandela Bay, where companies would underprice deliberately, they get work, and then once they get work, they approach the construction guys to go and stop a project so that they can get what they should have gotten from proper pricing, from variation orders and stoppage fees. And then lastly, there does need to be a pushback, enforcement of the law and policing. So, but none of these things, in my view, should be done alone. There should be engagement, affirming and developing, and affirm, because these young Black men mostly are looking to earn a living in a country that destroyed the economies that were independent, so that everybody could depend on this mainstream economy. So when there is a backlash as a result of that, the best way to deal with that is to ask ourselves questions. What more can be done in terms of becoming inclusive? I think let me leave it there. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mtika. You are saying we should engage, affirm, and develop. And you also indicated that capitalism in its own nature is a violent system. And as a scholar, you even said political environment, every human environment remains a conflict environment. Thank you so much, Dr. Mtika. We'll allow engagements at the end of all the presentation. That's why I was rushing you, so that we can have a presentation from the Honorable Minister Zikalala. Minister Zikalala will give us a government perspective on this phenomenon and also the interventions that are done by government. Over to you, Honorable Minister Zikalala.
No, thanks. And I believe I'm audible.
You're audible,
Program
Mr.
facilitator. Thanks, Mr. Seroklok, Sediko, Anthony, and Mr. Mtika. May I then take this opportunity to also greet all people who are in the platform. We welcome this opportunity to engage on this concerning trend that is developing, which have been characterized as the construction mafia. Because of the detailed analysis that have been given by the two panelists, I will then just add a few things and get into what we're doing as government. Maybe then we also affirm that according to the global initiative, which conduct studies in the work of organized criminal syndicates, about 186 projects have suffered from construction disruption, extortion, and all of these things. About 68 billion has been the cost to the economy. Currently, police are investigating 682 cases, and they have been arrested to some of these cases to an amount of 702 people who have been arrested. The government is engaging on this phenomenon with a view of ensuring that it is eradicated. Our approach is to ensure that we remain committed in empowering genuine entrepreneurs and individuals. But at the same time, we are not going to enter into prolonged negotiations with people who are interested in disruption, hijacking of construction sites, and extortion. So while we engage, we will engage with an intention of assisting those who are eagerly prepared to participate in the construction sector as entrepreneurs than people who just want payment and leave. So what are the interventions that we are putting in place? One is law enforcement. This is coming, I'm presenting it as a first intervention, but in essence, the first intervention has been described by the first panelist on how we conduct the construction processes, the construction, the consultation, public participation, and all of that. So I'm not going to repeat on those issues, but the intervention to crack down this construction mafia, one is the enforcement. Government has enhanced the capacity and resources of law enforcement agencies to investigate and prosecute in this sector. The special task force exists within the police and is working with the Directorate of Priority Crime. The second is to ensure that regulations are tightened and clear and transparent. As government, we've set up institutions to assist those who want to participate in the construction and the economy as a whole. Among others is CIDP, CBE, which is the construction built environment. We also have Agrima SA. We have policies on localization, and that include 30% that should be spent on local SMMEs so that they get empowered. But the question is how one access those opportunities. We have emphasized that if a big company gets an opportunity in a particular area, they must then liaise with the municipality and get the database of local companies. And in issuing opportunities in terms of the 30% subcontracting, they must then use the local database so that we avoid where a situation where big companies will parachute from one area to another area with the same SMME. So they must be spread. But we are also saying on top of that, the regulations must enforce a rotational. It must not be one company that is always supported. They must be spread in that database of the municipality. So we are using both enforcement, but to ensure that there are clear regulations, there is empowerment in a form of ensuring 30% localization. The third is public-private cooperation. We're fostering collaboration between government, law enforcement agencies, and industries. In this case, we are able to work together to protect construction sites. And in some cases, I know that they've even developed systems where people in the construction sites are able to report to police with immediate effect. We are also engaging with trade unions as well as communities. In this regard, we are also now, as the Department of Public Works and Infrastructure, piloting what we call facilitation, where we will have a unit that will focus on facilitation so that all people who are involved or all stakeholders are able to be engaged and participate in these projects. Fourthly, we are enhancing whistleblower protection because there are people who are eager to see development. They're able to inform police and inform us as government of those individuals who are engaged in these criminal activities. They, if they act openly, become victims at the end. And we are now embarking on a process to ensure that they are protected. Fifthly, we are engaging on education and awareness campaign, raising awarenesses. The first awareness is to ensure that all people who are in the construction, small contractors, are empowered, educated on how to access opportunities, and then be supported through CIDP and our two other entities. But we are also now engaging and educating communities on the negative effect of these criminals, because we must separate those who are engaged in criminal activities from those who are eager to participate in the construction sector. So these are interventions that we are packaging. I've heard some of the speakers alluding to some interventions. I will support, it is part of our program, that we enhance engagement and development of small contractors. That is what we are going to scale up through CIDP. We are working hard to ensure that we become so inclusive in the economy and ensure the participation of the previously marginalized in a fair manner that does not select the few, but spread opportunities. The question of the use of military to intervene, it's what we are also considering as government. Thanks a lot, program facilitator. Because of time, let me adjourn at that level. I will engage with questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. In summary, you are saying the government is willing to engage, affirm and develop entrepreneurs who are willing to enter construction space, but will not be bullied to engage those who just want to disrupt projects and get quick bucks without doing anything. Those who are entrepreneurs or they're willing to be entrepreneurs within this space will be engaged, affirmed and be developed by government, because government has got systems and structures that were established to do development. That's what you're saying, Honorable Minister. Without a waste of time, we'll take first 3 questions. When you ask your question, please indicate your name, the panel member that you are directing that question to, and just go straight to the question. No context, no background, nothing. You go straight to the questions. Because of time, we will organize a session for you to give a background one day. We'll go to Menzi Ngobo and Tozi for now. Menzi Ngobo and Tozi. Menzi, you'll be the first. Tozi, you'll be the second. And Alan, you'll be the last one for this round. Tozi? Sorry for that.
Is it me, Program Director? Is it Tozi? My name is Dr. Tozamila Botha. I want to pose a question to any of the presenters, especially Dr. Mtika. The question is, do these mafia gangs that are targeting the 30% in the township communities, are they part of the bidding exercise initially when the big contractor applies for the, tenders for the project? Or does he have to, in turn, invite tenders to bid for the 30% in his bigger contract? Because I heard a comment that these small contractors price low, but force the bigger contractor to pay the price that he should have priced in the first place. He just priced to enter in this contract that has already been awarded. And my fear is that that then causes the corruption, plus it makes communities fight among themselves, because then everybody wants that 30%. Why can't these people be made to be invited in before or during the tender process?
So the question is, are they part of the bidding exercise? Let's go straight.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tozi. Menzi, the question. Menzi, your question? You are muted again, Menzi. You have Menzi, you can ask your question. Menzi? Okay, let's go to Alan.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Alan.
Thank you so much. My name is Alan Fuchs. I'm from the Gauteng Legislature. Now, the Minister has mentioned certain interventions, the first one being law enforcement. Now, let's be frank and honest with each other. Law enforcement has not added terribly much value as far as this problem is concerned thus far. And I'd be interested to know from the Minister what is going to change in the future. My view, and I'd like...
Well, the question is that what is going to change in the future? Let's go straight to the question. We'll take your views later. Let's go to the question straight.
Sorry, Chair, just to finish the question, okay. Can I just... my view is that change in policy, a change in legislation and law enforcement are the issues that are really going to make the big difference. And I'm just wondering whether the Minister would agree or disagree. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Let's go try again to Menzi. We're giving you the last chance, Menzi. Menzi, your question? Okay. Panel members, there's a question to you, Dr. Mtika, on this so-called mafias part of the bidding exercise? And to the Honorable Minister, a question is that what is going to change in the future? Over to you, panel members.
Okay, so I think the first one, thank you, Dr. Tozi. Generally, they are not. So these are small companies that cannot bid on work, and there are regulations for CIDB that say only companies of a particular grade can respond to certain bids. They then go on site. That's why they go on site and stuff. And you find that many of them don't have registered businesses, are not tax compliant, and don't want to be tax compliant. That's why they prefer work to be allocated rather than to compete for the small 30% work. And then also, I think so that example I was making, in fact, it was the big contractors that play the system, not the smaller guys. So the big contractors, instead of pricing a project correctly, they would deliberately price it to undercut their competitors, and then go and get the contractors, the mafia, to stop their own project through underhanded dealings, and then use that stoppage to increase their fees. So yeah, that was the example, and I agree that change in legislation and policies is needed. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mtika. Honorable Minister.
I think the first is good that Alan is part of the lawmakers in the country, and we will welcome his contribution in that platform as he's a member of the legislature in Gauteng. What is going to change? Firstly, over a period of time, we have not paid sufficient attention to build the capacity of the law enforcement. And that is what we've been doing since last year. We have seen the first 10,000 recruits, and we are scaling up. The second intervention, there is already a unit that is dedicated to deal with this. The third intervention, there is a discussion within government on whether in the SANDF we cannot have a unit that will be dedicated to deal with this challenge. Having then dealt with one part of law enforcement, I fully concur that legislation is not static. Each and every time we need to look on how we improve legislation to respond to emerging challenges. If there is a need of reviewing some parts of legislation, we will consider that, but discuss it fairly in a way that we've been doing when dealing with legislative matters. For now, we believe that on the issue of being inclusive, we must work hard and ensure that we're inclusive. We ensure that we reach to all SMMEs to participate, but in doing so, don't be bullied and don't allow us to become some kind of a banana republic where people act willy-nilly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. We'll take the other three hands and we'll go to Thabo Madie, Munari, and Ayanda. Thabo Madie, you're first. Thabo Madie.
Evening. I don't know if you will be able to hear me.
We can hear you.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, Thabo Madie, we can hear you. Go straight to the question.
Are you okay? Okay, Minister, I would like to ask a question. You find that we go to certain site meetings, and then you find that even the officials are not protected. Whereby you go to a certain district, you find that the people within that district do not qualify for a tender, maybe based on their CIDB grading. But then these mafias want to control the registers and even intimidate the officials. Is it possible that maybe for a higher graded tenders that you can provide with the relevant law enforcement, especially in rural areas, like you come to the Northwest? Because now we know when we go to a site meeting, we're going to find these people there barricading the gate, saying only want the people from this district only.
Thank you so much, Thabo Madie. Munari, go straight to your question.
Thanks to us. This one goes to the minister. I think there is a need for an intense public participation prior the project can be implemented of the 30% component, what the 30% compromise of. Because at some point people look at the rent value and say, okay, 30% of X rent is 2 rents, instead of looking into into the nitty-gritties of what the 30% compromise of. I think there is a need for that public participation of a component of 30%. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monare. For this round, the Ayanda will be the last one. Ayanda? Ayanda?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you so much. Just 4 questions, actually. My first question.
We'll take only one question for now, bro.
Okay, let me just take the critical one. I just want to direct my question to the minister. I'm from the Wild Coast area. I just want to check or find out, in terms of the statistics that are presented today, can the minister reflect to us how many cases or how many cases have they arrested people that are involved in this mafia-related cases? I've got more things, maybe in the CITP related, maybe I'll have to engage the minister on the notes, because the CITP comments also needs detailed engagement on these issues. But I just want to know from the statistics, we have had so many projects stopped, and I just want to check how many of those projects where we have had cases opened, people arrested, and cases that are continuing in the court of law. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ayanda. Honorable Minister.
Well, thanks. I believe you can hear me. Maybe let me start with the last question. As I said, we have 186 projects that have been affected. Of these, 682 cases are being investigated. Of these cases, there are cases that relate, the majority of them relate to extortion. Then we have 702 arrests that have been done by police, and then the prosecution is ongoing. So I believe that then covers Ayanda. I think, Thabo Madia, the safety of our officials is critical. I will fully agree with you that we do need to ensure that in dealing with cases where there is a potential of either people being held at ransom or victimized or attacked, that security should be provided. And in the form of the DDM, we must work on those approaches. And that's why departments must align and cooperate in the implementation of projects. Now, the intensification of public participation by Monare, I fully agree, and I believe I have already alluded to that point earlier. In fact, we are, as the department, going to be engaging with other departments to ensure that we engage on public road shows where we will be able to say, these are entities that help SMMEs to participate in the construction industry. This is how you get into these projects. These are projects that are forthcoming, but we then begin to localize these in the implementation. We are truly committed to support people who want to participate, but not people who would want to come in and say, give me this, give me money, 30% value is this amount, and then, or people who will come and say, we want the security fee here. No, those are things that are not prescribed in these projects. So intensifying public participation, we agree, we're going to take it up and continue with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. And I think you are answering a question from Monare, but it's also a question from a guy called Ditumene on the chat box that talks about informing communities and also some stakeholders on issues of 30%. What does this 30% entail? So thank you so much, Honorable Minister. We'll take Amos. Lindokuhle, and Lufuno. Amos, you are first.
Evening. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you for the opportunity. My question is simple and straightforward. Minister, is there a reason why public order policing cannot be utilized whilst you have mentioned other measures that you are presently implementing? Because they don't seem to be that much busy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amose. Lindokuhle. Lindokuhle.
How do we balance the public sector projects, private sector projects, and the engagement? Because what I've observed is that
participate.
Sorry?
Okay, just wait.
Hello?
Just wait, Lindokuhle. We'll sort out certain technical issues here. You can ask your question again to Lindokuhle.
So my question is, how do you balance the private sector development with public sector development in terms of legislation and community engagement process? Because what I've observed is with the public sector, there seems that you have a clear sequence of how engagements happen. But the private sector development seems to be affected more by these mafia activities. There is no clarity in terms of compliance and policy. How do we balance the two for a proper engagement and prevention of these infiltration by so-called mafias in terms of documentation and planning and preparation? How do we balance the two?
Thank you so much, Lindokuhle. Lufuno, you are last on this round.
Chair, thanks. My question is, by the virtue of related to legislation, goes to the minister. Has there been consideration to consider accreditations of individuals forming companies in order to grade the companies on the CIDB side properly? It makes no sense to have a master's graduate with 20 years experience starting at grade 1. I needed to give that example. I hope it gives context. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Lufuno. Over to you, Honorable Minister.
Thank you. I think the use of public order policing, I would not fully concur that they are not utilized. They are utilized in many areas. I know that they've been utilized in Pretoria, Silvercorp, when we were disrupted. I know that they've been utilized in KwaZulu-Natal in various projects. But we will have to ensure that we build the capacity of the police to intervene and intervene decisively. Not that we want to enforce authority in a brutal way against the people, but there must be law and order. I think all of us will have to agree on that. Now, we will ensure that in all areas, public order policing is included and utilized. But I know in these areas that I've mentioned, we have gotten assistance from them. In public sector and private sector. With private sector was strict on localization and everything. Yes, private sector might not be so strict, but we have established a way where if the private sector is investing, we register that in the strategic infrastructure projects, SIPs, and we ensure that they are supported. In doing so, we engage with them also to ensure that they open up opportunities for local companies to benefit. The local benefits include employment, it includes SMMEs. We also facilitate, and that's why under Infrastructure South Africa, we're also beefing up this arm that I referred to of facilitation, so that we're able to draw the public sector and private sector together. Even if it is a private sector project, we should be able to ensure that the facilitation is there to assist. Lastly, accreditation Yes, we continue to review accreditation. Many companies get accredited on the basis of, one, their capacity, financial muscles, as well as the skills that they have. But if there is a need of that, I'm sure, Lufuno, you can advise us more, but I believe CIDB has been using that. One weakness, though, that have been identified, which we have identified, is that companies with a grade that is high, you will find that they undercooked. Then they fail to do work. And that's why many companies, you find that they are either liquidated or they are in problems. And that's why there are a lot of unfinished projects that are in various provinces, which we are attending to. You might have seen us going to some of these projects, trying to unlock them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. We really appreciate that the responses. Colleagues, we are hosting this webinar in partnership with Public Works and Infrastructure, Association of Construction Project Managers, and the Nelson Mandela University, particularly the Center for Security and Peace and Conflict Resolution. I will allow Dr. Zikalala Breakfast to give us a brief overview on the Center for Conflict Resolution. Dr. Breakfast, are you ready?
Yes, I am, Daddy.
Let me try to share. Can you see the screen?
Just wait a sec. I'll be with you in a minute. Can you please display the slides? Yeah, there you go. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, cool.
Over to you,
Thanks, Ned. Thank you very much, Ndate. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of stuff. I presume that in the audience, you must be tired. So first things first, the center is subsumed in the Faculty of Humanities at Nelson Mandela University, and I am the head of it. So the center is meant to de-escalate the magnitude of social conflicts, in particular at local government level. Also, it is meant to facilitate conflict management locally and on a global scale. We also intend to develop an early warning system to intercept security threats, and from time to time, we contribute to the field of conflict, peace, and security studies through our scientific outputs as a center. We also acknowledge the symbiotic relationship between security and development. Can you move to the next slide, Ndate? Thank you very much. So we also have credit-bearing modules that we are pitching to a wider audience. We provide training, in particular with regard to modules on mediation, conflict management, and also organizational development. We also, from time to time, work side by side with multilateral institutions to try to assist in terms of the facilitation of conflict management. Can you please move to the next slide, Ndate? No, that's the first slide. You're going backwards now. The next one, yeah. So also we do hold workshops, seminars, and public lectures, and join forces with other partners, as we have done with you now. Yeah, I think that's that. I don't want to share too much information. I think this is enough. Thank you very much, Ndate.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zikalala Breakfast. And I'm sure as a center, you will reach out to the department on advising and also providing your expertise in terms of how to resolve this phenomenon. I'm sure you'll consider doing that and reaching out to the department, because if we don't address this issue of construction mafia, like it's said by Dr. Mtika, it can spread like a wildfire and we end up not controlling it. We'll have a mafioso state like in other parts of this world. Thank you so much. Colleagues, we are at the end of our session. We just want to thank all participants, all of you participants, but most importantly, thank all the panel members. We thank Dr. Mtika, who gave us an overview of political economy to construction. We thank the president of Association of Construction Project Manager, Anthony, for giving us the lived experiences of construction project managers. And we thank the Honorable Minister Zikalala for giving us a perspective of government and their interventions in dealing with construction mafias. In this webinar, what we have heard today is that there is a commitment from government to affirm, engage, and develop entrepreneurs. But there's no way that those who are just bullying and extorting money and demanding to be paid for doing nothing are going to be entertained. In that instances, the law must take its course. Let's allow the law to take its course. For those who are willing to be developed as entrepreneurs, they should engage government or various entities in a lawful manner for them to be assisted. Those who want to just extort money for not doing their job, let the law take its course. That's the message that we have derived from this webinar today. Thank you so much, colleagues, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you, sir.